want to discuss some points about what goes into a solo that makes it good and what doesn't make it good in my estimation. In other words, the do's and don'ts of good solo playing. Now, one of the things that I think is a good thing to avoid is what I call overkill, and that is when you do something that you think is rather clever or cute or unique, and maybe it really is if you use it very sparingly, but the temptation is to use it over and over again and to use it in excess so that it finally becomes terribly predictable and very boring. I'll give you an example of some of the things that I've seen through the years that guitar players do that might have some redeeming quality if it's done maybe once an evening, but the person doing it is extremely enchanted with it and has developed a habit of doing it all the time. For instance, not playing just a simple note, but attacking several strings on the way so that he plays in this manner. So instead of playing, he goes, that kind of thing. That's what I call overkill. They always do that. Or playing a note and falling off the note or falling upwards in this manner. Instead of just going, they will play, and it's very unmusical, it's very unsatisfying, at least to my ear, and the fact that you always do it, it's the always that you have to watch. So remember, anything that you do that you think is cute or clever or unique, keep it that way by using it sparingly. Another thing I'd like to talk with you about is getting contrast in your music. That is, it should, during a chorus, it should reflect music that is simple and complex. For instance, it can be very simple and then it can move into something that is more complicated. So don't be afraid to use both, because if you only use very simple things, it will be very bland and very predictable and nothing to really surprise an audience. And if you use only complex things all the time, it makes the audience very nervous and there's no relief. So the way to do it is just the way a good director and a good writer prepare a motion picture. There are places where it's very tranquil and peaceful, and there are places where there's tension. The tension relaxes, it resolves into the peaceful situation. Have both of those elements in your music, and you will have better music, and you'll have a more listenable audience. Another thing to think about is, as you play, not to play in such a way that your improvisation ends up being perpetual eighth notes. Usually, most guitar players not only play the perpetual eighth notes, which I think you should avoid, but they always pick every note. Now, if you think about horn players, they don't tongue every note, and so you shouldn't pick every note. It makes it too much all of the same sort of thing. But by getting variety in your playing through slurs and bending and falling off of notes and giving different types of ornamentation to the notes and coloration, you achieve more variety. So instead of just playing where you're playing, there's no rise, there's no fall, everything. But rather than doing that, play where you play a few eighth notes, then rise and fall, changes all the time. Avoid perpetual eighth notes. Another thing is dynamics. Don't always make everything loud. Don't always make everything soft. You can play in such a way that you really attract a lot of attention. If you're going loud and soft. These are the things that are very important, dynamics. There's a time to be loud, there's a time to be soft, and in between. Another thing is think of your music as containing textures. That is, all of the harmonies and all of the chords are either usually dissonant or consonant. Don't have everything sound consonant. Don't have all of your music sounding like this. and don't have all of your music sounding like this. One is constantly mysterious, and it creates tension, and the audience will not listen very long, and they'll get very restless. And the other way, if it's all these simple chords, they'll get very bored. So again, the music should have this give and take. There should be little interesting, tranquil moments that lead into dissonance. Another thing to think about in your playing is developing sequence. That is, make up phrases and then follow it with another phrase that is sequential, that it has a lot of the elements that the previous phrase had. This relates the two together. I'll show you what I mean as far as what is good sequence playing. For instance, something like this. Or like something like this. You can see that there is a relationship. Even though the chords change, the lines in each of these measures related together. They were sequential. Now, that's a very good thing to develop, but what you want to avoid, again, is the overkill. You don't want to have your playing constantly filled with sequential playing, because it gets to be a trap, it gets musically addictive, and it gets very boring for the audience because it becomes very predictable. For instance, if you were playing it's too predictable. But there's no reason why you can't use some kind of sequence but change it around by inverting it in any number of ways. Now, I'll show you how we can take that same thing and change it and make it less predictable but still sequential. You can see that it is not exactly sequential, but it is a little sequential, and that makes it more interesting to the people, and it still shows a relationship of one phrase to the other.